Hey, what's up guys, Tava here, and today I'm going to be analyzing my editing timeline for a short documentary that I made a couple of months ago. Now keep in mind that the way I did things isn't necessarily the right or wrong way to do it, it's just personally how I did it. And there are a few things that I'm going to touch on in the editing process that I did before that I don't exactly love and I would have changed if I did it again. So I'm going to be touching on the things that I thought worked and didn't work in my editing process so other people can take these tips and use them for their separate projects. Okay, so jumping into the computer, you can see for this project I used Final Cut Pro to edit, and I have my entire timeline here organized by color. So you can see, just going through it, on the top I have my first adjustment layer in this kind of purple color, and this is where I applied all my color correction and color grade to the entire short film. And down below my color grade I have my titles, which are in purple, and you can see they kind of overlay certain areas and introduce people as well as different obvious titles. Moving down, you can see in green, this is going to be my B-roll footage. So this is all the footage that kind of overlays all the interviews, and I place that mostly on top. And then down below, I have this orange color, which is going to be my A-roll. So that pretty much goes on the first layer of the edit all the way through to give the main footage to the entire documentary. And then moving down, I have in purple my dialogue. So all the purple underneath is going to be dialogue. Kind of shifts in between and mostly goes along with the A-roll footage. And down below you have this purple color, and these are my sound effects, and I place these throughout the film to integrate Foley as well as room tone and things like that to further the story. And finally on the bottom I have my music, which is in this kind of greenish color, and it goes along the bottom, shifting in and out of volume based on where dialogue is. So my documentary really doesn't have that many layers, but it's just a few of the most important ones, and I color graded them here so it's a lot easier to see which ones go where. So starting at the beginning of my documentary, I didn't organize this the way that you would traditionally do it because I did shoot the entire film as well as direct the entire film. So the whole time I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted to edit the whole thing and the footage that I did have. Personally, this isn't the greatest way to go around it. You should still always organize your clips, because in my case here I have about 4 hours of footage that I shot on multiple days, and you just have to sort through all of that. And finding the specific footage that you want can be really hard to do when you have all of this unorganized footage. So organizing it is a great idea. So my first thought for this documentary was to introduce it with some news footage, because it was a really big event that a lot of people heard about, and so seeing some news footage brings you right into the story itself. So right at the beginning I placed some of this B-roll news footage here with some of the audio down below, and I made the decision to add some introductory text right here in the beginning because I felt that I didn't have enough footage to explain what was happening without it. So I thought it would not make as much sense if I didn't have this little bit of text. So from here in the beginning I added some A-roll to introduce our location and our situation. So I have some real non-interview A-roll to introduce conversations between the teachers in this story. And I really wanted to do that to introduce the teachers without having them introduced through interviews, so you get an idea of what's going on without them being formally introduced. So from this area though, I did switch to the interview, and for interviews I had this setup where I had these compound clips. I did have 2 different camera angles as well as an audio track. So if I go in and look at my video angles, you can see for interviews that I can select between these 2 different angles and cut between them when I want to. So that's a really nice thing to do. If you have 2 different camera angles, you can cut between the 2 depending on what side you want to see of the person you're filming. So from here I start the narrative of the story, and I kind of give some background to introduce the idea to people who don't exactly know what's happening. So I really wanted to do that to make sure people understood the entire story as best as they could. So here I actually started the narrative where I introduced the teachers with the text right here, and then I would add some B-roll to kind of give exposition to the story as it's going, since the audience might not understand exactly what's going on. And I introduced the story for a little bit just to give some exposition to the entire idea of what's going on, so people have a better idea that these teachers are in a warehouse after a fire devastated their town. So I really wanted to push that through as a hook and also to get people more interested into the story. So from here, after introducing a majority of the teachers, I decided to add an intro. So you can see all of this B-roll right here, just quick cuts over music. So I basically just added that there and then have a title for the documentary. I'm not sure if this is my favorite move, but I just think it gives some separation from the intro to the rest of the film. After the intro, I introduced more of the situation that everyone is in by showing some more situational narrative. This is more just A-roll of students and everyone getting ready for the day of school. And from this little A-roll section after the intro, I began to cut the actual documentary story more coherently together. So since I made this entire documentary by myself, I had a really good idea of the questions that I wanted to ask the teachers when interviewing them. So the questions that I asked the teachers, I had already thought out and basically made an idea of how I could chronologically put this together into the story of the documentary. So a lot of the interviews I have, the questions actually go in order of how the documentary flows, and so I could take out a step of organizing what people say. One thing that I don't exactly love that I did because I edited this documentary so fast is use different angles of different people saying the pretty much exact same thing. So basically for the first question, what I asked all the teachers is, what is the biggest challenge working in this warehouse? And they all said the noise, and basically what I did is take that section from all of them and combine it together. So I have a segment of each of the teachers saying, oh, the noise is the biggest issue, the noise is the biggest issue. And in the moment, I thought that would strike through the image that yes, it is the biggest issue, but listening back later, I realized that it's a bit too repetitive and you just hear it again and again, and you already got that idea earlier, so you don't need to hear it all these multiple times. But another thing you can see in editing is I did add music underneath, and it kind of fades in and out as the dialogue and audio goes on and on. And also in between different interview clips, which I will note that I labeled on the top so I know who's talking and what the interview is about, I did interlay certain areas of B-roll, so it would be a little bit of talking, B-roll of that example of what they're talking about, back to the interview, then a bit more B-roll. One thing that I wish I did, and I will talk about this multiple times, is interlay more B-roll over the interview sections. This is something that I kind of overlooked when making it, and I should have shot a lot more B-roll because you really want B-roll covering a majority of the dialogue. In documentaries, you really only want to see the interviews of people talking for super short segments and introducing them or parts where they're really emotional or things like that. And for mine, I left a lot of the interviews just open. No B-roll over the top, just the interviewer talking. And for me, that personally slows down the pace a lot and makes it less interesting, so I wish I would have fixed that or shot more B-roll when making the documentary. So you can see here that I do have more interview A-roll here, and then when the person's done talking, I kind of overlay what they're talking about. And again, introducing new people, I put the text right here so you have this fade in and fade out. So right here is an example of something I did in the documentary that I wish I would have done more, which is overlaying the B-roll over the A-roll interview sections. So you can see here you have a person talking, then it cuts to B-roll footage over them of what they're talking about. You can kind of see explanation, and it fits way better into the story. So it's more of a narrator rather than an interview. And you can see here, I wish I would have had B-roll to fill in these sections because basically it just goes from B-roll to A-roll and it's just cutting back and forth, and personally kind of chaotic in my opinion. Now the next thing I did, because I didn't exactly have story beats in my film, I wanted to separate topics. And to separate topics, basically what I did is just add a segment of B-roll to introduce the area, kind of what's going on, and I really liked how this turned out. So basically when people are done talking about the certain subject that was for the past few minutes, it's gonna cut to this area of showing these different clips throughout the building, kind of solidifying what I just talked about, but also transitioning to a new topic. For a few of these, like this one, it might be a bit too long before starting the next one, but I do think it helps the pacing a lot. So after this B-roll transition segment, now the teachers are talking about what they're missing, what they don't have in this building space that they had in a traditional classroom. And so I like that a lot. And then another thing that I like doing is adding B-roll between the two interviewers. So I switch from one person to another right here. You can see that I have this B-roll transitioning over. So if I play it, it's one person talking, and then there's B-roll, and then it's suddenly another person. So that adds a smoother transition between multiple people in the interview sections. There's not enough B-roll that I shot to cover all of these interviews. There's a few short B-roll clips on the top, but the majority of it is left open, and that should be filled in because there's too much of just looking at people, looking at interviewers and watching people does show emotion, but after a while it does get a bit boring, so you should really leave it for the most crucial points because that adds the most emotion in those specific areas. So moving on, we have more of this format, which is just the A-roll with the B-roll on top and then the dialogue underneath with some music backing it up. So that just continues for a while. You can see here that I have another transition. So with this transition, I added a few of those B-roll clips to move between this part and then this part here. And also with that, I did have to add some Foley, which is this like school library sound, to introduce this, as well as some room tone, which is this clip here. Now another thing that I like doing to transition between segments of the documentary is to switch the music. So you can see here that I have this song here. It fades out at the end of this piece. Now before I switch to this beat of the documentary, a new song comes in on the bottom. So this fades in and kind of introduces the new tone that you're going for the next segment and what people are talking about. Again, if we move forward, it's the same format with the B-roll on top, the interview down below, and the dialogue on the bottom with music supporting the entire part. Now we're moving forward past the 10-minute mark, and so you can see again, I have another transition here between this segment and this segment with more B-roll and more Foley. So my pacing for the film is pretty straightforward. I wish I would have sped it up a bit in removing certain parts of the interviews that are repetitive, because I think I could turn this 16-minute documentary into more of a 12 or 10-minute documentary just to speed it up, get the ideas more thoroughly through quicker. So when I get to about the 13-minute mark, something that I did was intersperse actual teaching footage of the teachers. So I had them mic'd up with a lav mic, and then I just introduced this into the film. So I got a better idea of what they've been talking about through interviews in a more logical sense with the students there. Without that, I thought that the documentary would be really bland with people just talking, and I needed some actual examples of them doing their jobs in this environment. And again, shooting more is always better. I should have done more of it, but I just didn't have time for that. So in this part, after the teacher is done explaining the lab, I cut to parts of the students actually participating in the lab to reiterate what the person just said. Now at about the 14-minute mark, I start the ending to the film. So I bring in this song down here, which is kind of an emotional piece. So I cut from this last B-roll part here to basically a string of different interviews of different teachers from different angles, kind of summarizing my last question on hope and what can be done in the future and how this can be changing students' lives and things like that. So this is where the powerful part of the documentary comes in. This is the finale, this is the strong piece. So this is what I really wanted. I wanted all these teachers, all their different views, and I think it is a really powerful part of the documentary, especially with the music underneath going up. So you can see from down here it's -5 decibels to at the finish it's up at 3.4. So it's kind of this rising crescendo of music that goes along with these powerful statements by these teachers. And I'm gonna say it again, I didn't have enough B-roll to go over this. So it's all these teachers talking from the same angle. So if you play it, it just cuts between teachers sitting in the exact same place. So it's a bit awkward and it cuts a bit weird. So either in this, I should have interviewed teachers in different locations, or I should have added some B-roll over the top, just because it doesn't exactly flow that well. One thing you can do if you're shooting all in the same location though, is use different camera angles. So from here you can see it's the straight on angle, then it cuts to the side angle, and from this part you can see it transition to another person's, the straight on angle, but it doesn't look as weird because you've already seen the side angle, so it looks like a different place already. It helps to flow a lot better that way. So in the documentary we get up to this point and we have our final statement, raise it to the highest point, and boom, we cut out and the music fades out. You would think the documentary is over at this point, but I decided to add a bit of B-roll at the end to give this kind of summarizing feel and hopeful outlook towards the end before the credits. So you can see here that I fade out one track and then fade in another music track, as well as fading in visuals, and then kind of just do a powerful montage here of the entire environment that these people are in to kind of soak up those last statements that were just talked about in the interviews. So from here you can see music hits a high point. We're clipping a little bit there, but that's not a big problem. And we hit to credits. So that's basically it. That's my analysis for the short documentary that I made a couple of months ago. Despite having a lot of things in it that I would like to change and wish I would have changed back then, the documentary did get a lot of praise and people liked it a lot, and it helped raise a lot of donations. So that's always a good thing to keep in mind. Despite what you would always change and fix, other people will always see it differently than the person who created it themselves. So for anyone thinking about creating a short documentary, these are the steps that I took to create mine, as well as things that I personally would have done differently. And you can keep those things in mind if you're thinking about doing a project like this one. If you like this analysis but I have no idea what the documentary is talking about, be sure to check it out. I'll leave it linked down below. And that's it for today. If you like this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.